Grace and peace be unto you. This is your brother Yehuda ben Isaiah. And I'm coming with a quick session, right? Dealing with the topic of Christ and Pontius Pilate. Christ and Pontius Pilate. Now, when you go into the front of this book here, it says the letters of Pontius Pilate. The letters written during his governorship of Judea. And it says, and he wrote the letters to his friend Seneca, right? Seneca, back in Rome. Seneca was back in Rome. So these letters was collected from Seneca back in Rome. The book is called The Letters of Pontius Pilate because Seneca and Pontius Pilate, they were good friends. And while Pontius Pilate was the governor or the procurator of Judea, he basically wrote back and forth to Seneca in Rome and informed Seneca of everything that took place in Judea while he was procurator, while Pontius Pilate was the procurator, right? That is why it's called the letters of Pontius Pilate. So the letters was collected from his friend Seneca back in Rome, right? Now, when you first read the book, it talks about Pontius Pilate. When he first arrived in that region, the first place that he went to was Alexandria, Egypt. See, a lot of people don't know this history because they don't have the writings, or they refuse to dive in to do research and get accurate history of what took place, right? So basically, when Pilate first arrived in that region, the first place he went to was Alexandria. And then later on, he met Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the high priest during the time of Christ. So he met Caiaphas, right? But what I want to do first, let's go to page 14. So what Pilate did, he did not understand the culture and the language, none of that. He could not speak Hebrew or Aramaic. So what he did, he found two Hebrew Israelites. In fact, they was called Grecians because there was Israelites living as Greeks and they spoke the Greek language. So Pilate sought for two men or somebody who can be basically his assistant. His assistant to basically show him the ropes of the region, the culture of the people, the history of the Jews, etc. Somebody who can translate and interpret back and forth because, like I said, most of the Romans, they could not speak Hebrew or Aramaic. So they communicated through interpreters, right? So in fact, let's go back to page 14. Let me flip back. So what he did, he got himself two assistants, right? So let's read what he says real quick about his two assistants. Now I'm going to show you how this also lines up with the Bible, right? I am going to show you also how it lines up with the Bible. It says, I have been lucky. Pilate says, I have been lucky. Now, this is what he wrote back to Seneca in Rome. I have been lucky, by the way, in engaging two of Valerius' staff for myself. See, one is Marcus Rufus, his chief military officer, and now mine. So Pilate selected this guy named Marcus Rufus, okay? And then it says, who has been on leave and is traveling back with me. See, the other person, Pilate says, who is even more important is his secretary, Alexander. He is a Jew, but one of those Jews that is half Greek. You see, Greek on the surface and Jew at the bottom. So Alexander was a Grecian. He was a Greek-speaking Jew. He spoke Greek and he spoke the Hebrew, Aramaic, etc., right? Then Pilate says, you cannot do without them. See, It seems that you cannot get a real Jewish Jew to put himself at the service of a mere Roman governor. And if you could, you would be little better off because he would not have the languages. See? And languages are needed. I assure you. Right? And then he says, there is one sort of Hebrew for their sacred writing. There is Aramaic that they commonly talk. See? So they spoke Aramaic for the most part. There is Greek for non-Jews and for all educated people. See? Because many of the Jews that was educated, like Paul, they spoke Greek also. Educated people. He said, whether Jews or not. And there is Latin for the Roman procurator and his staff if they don't choose to use the Greek. Alexander, Pilate says, speaks them all. So Alexander was a Grecian Jew. He spoke them all. And then he says, Alexander knows everything, right? I am told that only person in this part of the world who is sharper than a Greek is a Greek educated Jew. So then he says, congratulate me. He told Seneca back in Rome, congratulate me, therefore, of my Alexander. Congratulate me because I found this guy to be my assistant. Alexander and Rufus. Alexander and the other guy named Marcus Rufus. Now let's go to the book of Acts. Let's see who is Alexander and Rufus that Pilate spoke about here. Let's go to the book of Acts to see who was Rufus, Marcus Rufus, and Alexander. Let's go to Acts 4 and read verse 6, 5 and 6. It says, Peter before the high priest. And it came to pass on the morrow that their rulers and elders and scribes, verse 6, and Annas the high priest and Caiaphas was the high priest that had Christ crucified, and John and Alexander, you see, and as many as were of the kindred of the high priest were gathered together at Jerusalem, because Alexander became Pontius Pilate assistant. When you go back to the letters of Pontius Pilate, Alexander and Rufus. Now let's go to Acts 19 and 13. 19, 13. And this book here, I highly recommend you buy this book. This book here also lines up with the Bible. Acts 19, let's read verse 33. 33, right? Acts 19, 33. Look what it says here. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, and the Jews putting him forward, and Alexander beckoned with his hand and would have made his defense unto the people. But when they knew that he was a Jew, because what? When you go back to the letters of Pontius Pilate, Pilate said that Alexander spoke Greek and Hebrew. That's why he selected Alexander to be one of his assistants. Alexander speaks them all. Alexander knows everything. Alexander is a Greek speaking educated Jew. So when you go back to Acts 19, when you go back to Acts 19 and 33, 34, it says to Alexander, but when they knew that he was a Jew, all with one voice about the space of 2 hours, they cried out, great is Diana of the Ephesians, right? Now let's go to Mark 15, the book of Mark. Let's go to the book of Mark, one of the four gospels, real quick here. The book of Mark, right? Let's see what it says concerning Alexander or Rufus. The book of Mark, I think it's right after Matthew. I'm going to Mark 15. Mark chapter 15 and verse 21 when I get there. Showing you how the letters of Pontius Pilate lines right up. Mark 15, verse 21. Look what it says here. And they compelled one Simon, a Cyrenian, who passed by, coming out of the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear the cross. Let me read it one more time. And they compelled one Simon of Cyrene, a Cyrenian or Cyrenian, who passed by, coming out of the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear the cross. So guess who bare Christ's cross? Rufus, mentioned by Pontius Pilate, and Alexander. And it says in the gospel that this man that bare the cross was a black man. He was a black Jew. He was the father of Alexander. And then, like Pilate says back here, one of Marcus Rufus. See, Marcus Rufus, and Alexander, right? Alexander. He said Alexander spoke Greek and Hebrew. That's why you can read. I just read about Alexander, right, in the book of Acts. Now let's go back to the book of the letters of Pontius Pilate. Let me show you guys something. Let's see what it says about Christ. Let's see what it says about Christ. Let's see what it says. Because one day, Alexander and Pontius Pilate's wife was out and about. And guess what? They got a chance to witness Christ preaching to the people. But let's read here. Let's see what it says here about Christ. Look what Pontius Pilate wrote back to Seneca in Rome. He says right here, it seems that all of Galilee is agog about Jesus. Everyone knows of someone who has heard of someone else who has been cured of some disease or other. And the interesting thing to me, Pilate says, is that a number of my good subjects of Judea are also in Galilee, following the preacher. So Pilate says that many people that was working for him, they also was following Christ, when they would be better employed following their jobs at home. You see that? Following their jobs at home. Now let's see what Pontius Pilate's wife said when she was walking with Alexander, right? Let's see what they said and what they saw. Let's see what they said and what they saw, right? In fact, let's start right here. She said to Pilate, her and Alexander, we came suddenly on a crowd of people who were hurrying along the road in front of us, over the slopes leading down to the sea, and even along the beach. And others are joining them from the paths that came from the hills. No one took notice of us. They were Jews of all kinds, mostly hale and hearty people. But there were sick and cripples too, who were dragging themselves, she says, along or being carried by friends. The crowd was excited, gesticulating, pointing to a boat that was following the coastline. So she's telling Pilate and Alexander, or she giving the story to Pilate, her husband. She said that the crowd is gesticulating, pointing to a boat that was following the coastline and shouting to those on board. And I thought at first that they were angry, but Alexander said that they were calling to Jesus, because Alexander understood what they were saying because he spoke Greek and Hebrew. Let's continue. Who was on board? So Christ was on board. So Alexander told Pontius Pilate's wife, they was hollering at Christ. They were screaming at Christ, right? Or they was calling to him, right? Who was on board? To come to shore and speak to them. And they kept on shouting the same words over and over again. She said they kept shouting the same words over and over again. And I could not make it out because it was all Aramaic. See, all Aramaic. And when I asked Alexander, he only shook his head and muttered something about it being bad business. And he, Alexander, would not tell me what they meant, though he told me later. When we stopped at the farmhouse, the crowd rushed on, and presently I could see them leaving the high road and hurrying down to the shore. So she said the crowd was rushing down to the shore by the boat. And Alexander asked permission to go after them. And I said he could, provided that he took me with him. So Alexander said, can I rush down? Because remember, Alexander was working for Pontius Pilate and his wife. So she said, yes, you can go down, but you have to take me too, with you. So we went, she said, we went with an escort. You need not to be afraid, she says. And after half an hour, we found them all in a great mass down near the sea, with Jesus standing on a knoll in the field. So she said, once they located Christ, he was standing on a knoll in the field, preaching to the people. She says, addressing them. And then she says right here, Christ was addressing the people. There were thousands upon thousands of them. At the back, quite close to us, some groups of better dressed Jews. So look what she says. There were thousands upon thousands of them, upon the people, right? The people. But look what she says here. And at the back of them, quite close to us, some groups of better dressed Jews. Who are these better dressed Jews? These better dressed Jews are the Pharisees, who were standing aloof, watching and listening. And Alexander took a look at them and muttered again, spies from Jerusalem, he said, and went off to talk to them. So Alexander went off to talk to the Pharisees, right? Let's continue to read. She said, I saw the preacher clearly, talking about Christ. He is a strange man, and gaunt and rugged, as though he was burnt by the fire of his compassion or passion. And when you see his face and him speak, he is full of self-confidence. She says, imperious, often fierce. And the crowd was noisy at first, because those at the back could not hear, and those were interruptions. She said there was interruptions. And he put them down with a few words. So she said that the crowd was interrupting, so Christ put them down with a few words, right? She says in the yellow, he, meaning Christ, was like a general among the legions, and they obeyed like common soldiers, the people. He spoke always as though he thought no one could contradict him. He began quietly, but then raised his voice, and it became harsh and vehement. So she said first, when Christ spoke, he spoke quietly at first, and then as he spoke, he got louder. The Jews from Jerusalem were fidgeting, meaning the Pharisees. They was fidgeting and muttering to each other. And Alexander said he was denouncing them and their friends. So Alexander told her that Christ was denouncing the Pharisees, etc. I have never heard anything that sounded so passionate, she said, and bitter. Then he began quieter again and went off in a rap way, as though he did not know the people was there. And there was murmuring and stirring all through the crowd, and then, but not angrily, and they pressed forward to him. And Alexander could not take his eyes off him. So she said Alexander could not take his eyes off Christ, right? Her and Pilate's assistant could not take his eyes off Christ. He kept on saying to himself, a better time is coming, and laughed in a queer, anxious way, because she was trying to ask Alexander, what is Christ talking about? So he kept saying, I'm going to let you know. But he kept watching Christ, right? I thought he was quoting something that the preacher had been saying. And he kept looking at the party from Jerusalem. So she said that Alexander kept looking at the Pharisees to see their face expression, because Alexander knew Christ was talking about them. She said, the party from Jerusalem, the Pharisees, and he said he must go get a report to you at once. And then she said, and then a curious thing happened. Right here, let me get it straight. She said a curious thing happened. Jesus suddenly raised his arm and the crowd out and cried out something sternly. And they stopped pushing towards him and sat down on the grass in a great circle round him, except the Jews from Jerusalem. So she said all the people, the crowd of people, they circled Christ and they sat down to listen to him, right? She said, except the Jews from Jerusalem, meaning the Pharisees, because she said there was better dressed Jews, right? And then she says, I am sure I have seen some of them going into the Sanhedrin. So now she's starting to recognize some of their faces. And then Jesus called some men who was standing close to him. These are the disciples, Peter, John, Thomas, all his disciples. Let's read it one more time. And then Jesus called some men who were standing close to him, and they brought him bread. And he broke it into little pieces so small that from where I stood, you could scarcely see them all. And he gave these to the men that they went along the ranks, distributing them to the crowd, who ate them with, it says, while the preacher went on talking. And I wish I could have understood, and all I could get out of Alexander was the preacher was enrolling them as his followers, but that it was not a military business at all. So Alexander told her that the preacher was enrolling them as his follower, but don't worry, it's not a military business, right? At all, but purely religious. And then it says the eating of the bread was a symbol that they enrolled themselves under him to live as he lived and to do all the things that he had been telling them to do, Alexander told her. Alexander added that it was dangerous. It might be misunderstood. The strangest thing was to follow, she says. When the ceremony was finished, everything was still for a few seconds, and then the crowd began to stir. Watch this. Talk gradually. They became more and more excited. And Jesus said something to the men about him. And running down to the sea, they began to pull the boat close in so that he can embark. So Christ told the men to go down to the boat so they can leave, right? Told Peter and them to go get the boat ready so they can leave. Then it says here, when the crowd saw that he was going to leave them, they broke all bounds or bonds. They ran towards crying and shouting and surrounded him. You see, the crowd did not want Christ to leave. Some of them was brandishing sticks and clubs and knives. They were not threatening him, though. It was quite different. Others of them were weeping. Many of them fell down at his feet. You see? All the time, I could make out that they were shouting the same words that I have heard them using on the high road. So she said, the same words I heard before, they were shouting the same words again. Right? When they were looking out to the sea, I asked Alexander, what are they saying? I had to shake him by the shoulder before I could get an answer out of him. He was impatient with me. So she kept asking Alexander, what are they saying? What are they saying? Then finally, he says, King, he said. That's what they're calling him. King of Israel, King of the Jews, and Messiah. She says, I am not sure what that last means, because remember, she was a Greek or a Roman. She was Pontius Pilate's wife. I'm not sure what the last means, but you will know soon, she told Pontius Pilate, right? And I could see that Jesus was repelling them. He would not listen to them. He almost drove them back with words of gestures. I am sure he was telling them that they had made a great mistake, just as the Bible says. He was almost beside himself. He made those who were kneeling or kneeling rise, and those who were brandishing weapons put them down. He was more stern and determined than before, right? She said, then all the afternoon. Then she said, at the same time, he began to move down to the sea hurriedly. So she says Christ began to hurry up and rush down to the sea so he can get inside the boat. Hurriedly, though he must escape. And the crowd followed slowly in a dejected way. They was following him kind of slowly, but wasn't really sure what to do. They seemed to be disappointed and bewildered. And it says he is angry with them for calling him King of Israel. Just as the Bible says, he did not want the people to call him that right away. Right? I said to Alexander, he has cause to be angry. He is a dead man from this day, she told Alexander. And there was another incident. But watch this here. She said there was another incident. Before Jesus could get in the boat, the Jews from Jerusalem, the Pharisees, who had been watching every movement of the crowd, they walked rapidly down the hill and spoke to him. So she said before Christ got into the boat, the Pharisees hurried up and walked down to the boat to speak to him, right? But look what it says here. They met each other as enemies. And I could see that, though I could not hear the words. And talk only lasted a few moments. And they said something to him, meaning Christ, and he looked at them with a face of stone. So she said that the Pharisees said something to Christ, and he looked at them with a face of stone. And then he answered curtly and turned his back on them. And some of his followers helped him in the boat, his disciples. And I thought they were puzzled too, and perhaps afraid. But she said, look what she said here. She said, but he, meaning Christ, he was not afraid himself. He spoke as and acted though he was all ready to fight the whole world. You see, he was not afraid himself, but he spoke and acted though he was ready to fight the whole world. You see that? So she said Christ wasn't afraid of these Pharisees. She said the way he looked at them and spoke to them before he got into the boat. But I just want to show you guys an eyewitness account of Alexander and Pontius Pilate's wife, right? Who was able to witness and see Christ teaching the crowd of people, right? And having his disciples break out the bread and give it to the people, right? And I showed you how Rufus and Alexander is mentioned in the Bible. And I showed you Rufus and Alexander was brothers, and their father is the same man that carried Christ's cross. You see that? Their father is the same man that carried Christ's cross. Isn't that something? And the Bible said that that man was a black man. So that means that Rufus and Alexander were black. So there you have it, just a quick history session dealing with the letters of Pontius Pilate. It has more information in this book. It talks about Christ going up to Galilee to preach. It talks about John being killed by Herod. It talks about Christ being crucified. It talks about all that stuff. And it gives you, and it lines right up. It lines right up with the Bible, and it lines up with some of the Josephus works. Lines right up. So I highly recommend you folks, if you can, get this book right here. The Letters of Pontius Pilate, written during his governorship of Judea, said written to his friend Seneca back in Rome. So with that, I say grace and peace to everybody. Until next time, grace and peace.